My name is Tiffany Griggs. I am a consultant with Alpha Publishing, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about teaching online interactive science and making it fun for both you and your students. So just really quickly, some of the things about Alpha Publishing. Who are we? Our model is in the region for the region. And essentially what that means is we're here for you. So we're not a completely outside company. Everything we do pertains and caters to the culture that you all are currently in. We publish math, science, reading, literature, ELT courses. If you could please mute yourselves. I have a slide, but it's a little bit later regarding that. And then we also publish in international standards. So next generation science standards, Common Core State Standards, the IB curriculum, CEFR, and Cambridge. And then we're in the regions of Asia, Middle East, Eastern region, Latin America, Africa, as well as Europe. All right, so in order to get the most benefit from this session, I just ask that you please keep yourself on mute mode. So that will help to cut down the background noise. And then if you have any questions, I do realize that there are a lot of us here. And so I am going to ask that you just put your questions in the chat. I do have the chat open and I'll take a look at that periodically. If you have an absolute burning question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. But if you could just try your best to maintain the questions in the chat, since there is a lot of us here. And then as far as the camera, you can choose to turn your camera on or off. It's completely up to you. So let me turn mine off. So what we're going to do today, so by the end of today's session, you should be able to understand distance learning and how to make learning fun online. You'll be able to understand how to differentiate in order to reach all of your students at the level that they currently are at. And then you'll also be able to use different questioning strategies to support student comprehension. So that's the main focus of today, and we'll do all of that using the online simulations. So how can we teach STEAM online and still make it inspiring, enjoyable, engaging? We have something that we use. We do models of scientific phenomenon. And it includes just simple materials. You can use video clips, some different photos. You can have your students, go outside and investigate in their own surrounding areas, of course, in a safe environment. But it's essentially being able to identify the natural world without actually having to physically with it. If you choose to do a little bit of lecturing, we just ask that, or we suggest that you keep it to a minimum. That the students in this 21st century here are very well aware. They grew up with technology. And so being online isn't anything new for them, but they don't want to just sit there. They want to interact. And so what we have now are simulations. So we have something available for you all to help inspire, engage, and spark interest in your students, even at a distance. And so if you are familiar with multiple intelligences, this essentially is a list of intelligences that many students have, or many people in general. And we are able to kind of hit all of these multiple intelligences in the Alpha Publishing curriculum in order to support students who learn at different levels, learn at different paces, learn at different ways. And so when I was in the classroom, when I was teaching, we used to call it being smart in your own way. So how are you smart? Are you auditory smart? Are you musically smart? Are you kinesthetic smart? And so this is just how you learn best. And Alpha has definitely taken an understanding of how to adapt its curriculum in order to support students in that manner. All right, so what we're going to do today is we are going to look at natural selection. It's a fun simulation on using a model to test a hypothesis. And then specifically with this simulation, it's about changes in a population over time. And essentially, what is a simulation? I hadn't gone over that in much detail, but it's a computer model of math games or science virtual labs that help keep your students interested, engaged, in learning the content in order to be successful. So we'll have fun today learning. Was there someone that wanted to say something? Okay, then please mute yourselves. Thank you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have fun learning how to use a model to test a hypothesis about the natural selection of rabbits. And so as we get started going through this, I'm going to kind of wear two separate hats, one as a trainer and then one as a teacher. And then I'm going to ask you to also wear those two hats, one as a teacher and then one as a student. So I want you to think about everything that we do today in terms of what the student would see and how you believe the student will feel, interact, engage with it. And then as you as the teacher, how you can help support student learning, how you can make it fun, how you can make it engaging, how you can ask the right questions using the different questioning strategies and things of that nature. All right, so we're going to do all of that using the 5E model. So we start engaging our students, and then we allow them to explore, then they explain, they elaborate, and then we evaluate, as well as they evaluate themselves. So all this is the 5E model. So we're going to go through this simulation using this 5E model. All right, so the first thing we have here is engage. So we're going to take we ask that you take about 5 minutes in order to engage your students. So before you open the simulation, essentially this is like the hook. And so this kind of helps draw your students' attention to the content, helps them kind of, be more inquisitive, inquire about exactly what they're going to learn for the day. And so the content focus, and you'll notice that almost all steps of the 5E model has a content focus, and then we have different areas, and we'll go through that. But the content focus is that animals have adapted to survive their environments. And so that's the focus of this engagement section of the 5E model. And then we're going to, after we hook our students, after we get them excited about learning, we have all of our discussions that we need. Again, this shouldn't take more than about 5 minutes. Then we're going to actually go to the simulation. So the learning outcome, which comes directly from the Alpha Publishing textbook, is how does natural selection influence the traits in a population? Now, I do have these 3 pictures on one slide, but you may want to make them 3 separate slides just so that they're as big as possible so that your students can see it. And so what I would do in the classroom as a teacher is I would have these 3 slides. I would have them really big, project them, or share them with my students just as I'm sharing them with you all now, and just ask them some questions. Give them a couple seconds just to look at each picture, I apologize, to look at each picture, and then I would ask them some questions regarding it. And so some different questioning strategies that we have, there's 2 types of questions. You can ask questions that help guide your students' learning, and then you can also ask questions that gather information about whether they understood or comprehend the information. And then, and I call it chunking. So at each stage of the 5E model, you can consider that a separate chunk. And you do 2 things. You do a check for understanding to make sure your students understood the information that was presented, as well as a checkpoint for you as the teacher. Was the objective met for that segment of the lesson? So if I could get a couple responses in the chat, who can give me some guiding questions for these pictures? Let's see, let's click on it. So who can give me a couple guiding questions, and think about your students, think about their ability levels, think about their engagement, if they're never been able to if they've never seen animals camouflage in the real world, what are some questions you could ask your students in order to spark discussion about these 3 questions? If you can just put a question or 2 in the chat. Anyone? All right, so how are these pictures alike? Thank you, Anwar. Very nice. So how are these pictures alike, as well as how are they different? Do we have any other questions? What patterns do you notice in the pictures? How can you explain the similarities between the color of the fish and the surroundings? Very nice, that's a great question. Where do you think these animals live? Nice. How animals defend against the enemies. Okay, so what sort of defense mechanisms do they have? How do they survive in the environment that they're in? What helps them to survive? These are all very good questions. So these are some questions. The common color pattern. What color pattern is common? Okay, very nice. So I just listed a couple questions. So for picture 1, you could ask, what do you notice about the pictures? Question or picture number 2, you see the bird in the picture. Is there another animal in the picture? And so let me go back so that you all can see. So if you see this second picture here, the first thing you see is the bird. And then you ask, is there another animal? And a lot of times your students are like, whoa, I didn't realize there was another animal there. So, and then the third picture, what is it that you see? So what type of animal is it? And if you notice, these questions can have a range of answers. And so it allows you to be able to address a question specifically to specific students, or you can just make it an open-ended question so that each student, or the students that you call on, can have that success. We know that when students are motivated to learn and when they feel successful, they're more engaged. And so very general open-ended questions allows you as the teacher to be able to see how your students are receiving the information or comprehending. And then we have questions that gather information about the student's understanding and learning. And so some questions could be, why do you think these animals look the way that they do? What other animals use camouflage? So depending on your grade, depending on what level your students are at, this may be a higher ability question for your students. How does it help them survive? And so this could be, again, a very general question, and you can assess your students' level of comprehension based on these questions. And then we have a checkpoint. So this is mainly for you as the teacher. Your students should be able to identify the animals in a picture, explain how their appearance contributes to their survival. And so that was the purpose of this really quick, engaging activity, to kind of draw it out. You could even choose some pictures based on your region. I heard there are a couple people here from Russia, some people from Kuwait and Egypt. So choosing things that relate to them, that they see on a daily basis, may even help support that as well. So to continue with that engagement section, you can provide the class with a hypothesis to test. Again, based on the ability of your students. If you have some more advanced students, maybe you want to have them develop their own hypothesis from some observations or the data that they collect. So they would create their hypothesis after they've done the simulation. But for today, I'm actually going to give you the hypothesis, which says, if natural selection is to occur, then there are 4 requirements that are needed within a population. And so these are the 4 requirements. The population must be able to reproduce, or these are the 4 requirements. The population must be able to reproduce, that's 1. The environmental factor is required. The environmental factor is required. 1 trait must benefit for the survival and ability to reproduce, and the traits must be inherited. So these traits must be able to be passed down to successive generations. So this is the hypothesis that we're going to go with. Now, again, this hypothesis is pretty in depth. So if you teach maybe a 6th grade class, this is actually an 8th grade lesson. And so again, depending on your students' ability levels, you may want to require things to be a little bit more advanced or more complicated. You may want to provide the actual hypothesis, completely up to you. So all of that happened in the first 5 minutes before we opened any simulation. And so now you kind of have your students eager and ready for the simulation. And so what you would do is you go to this website. And actually what I'm going to do is, since you all are students, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this website in the chat. And I'm going to ask you all to take a moment if you can. Please don't feel like you have to. But take a moment and let me find my chat now. If you can, just click on the link and go to the simulation. There's a couple different ways that you can run the simulation. I just put it in the chat. Do you all see it?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the easiest way to go about using the simulation is to click the start button. But if you have internet issues, or if you just want to make sure that you're able to use the simulation and it's pretty seamless, you also have the ability to download the simulation. So you click on the video, or you click on the link, and it takes you to this home screen. So if you click on the start button, you have a couple different options. So the first option is intro. So this is just a general, and this is actually all that we're going to go through today based on our limited amount of time. And then we have a little bit more advanced where you can look at a lab and look at different phenotypes and things like that. So again, depending on your students' level of comprehension. So once the simulation loads, what you'll do is you click on intro, and then you would either allow your students to work in groups or to work individually, depending on your class sizes, again, your student levels, and the platform that you use. I know that a lot of the schools that I work with either use Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And so, putting your students into breakout rooms in order to, fill out a worksheet or some sort, in order to collaborate, in order to understand it. Or you could do it completely individually, completely up to you. But for the Explore section, I would highly suggest that you give your students about 5 minutes just to play. Because like I mentioned earlier, these students, as 21st century students, they are very adept to working and learning online. And so the first thing they want to do is they want to play. They want to see it as a game. So you give them that opportunity to kind of get that out the way. And it also helps them understand where the different buttons are, the different functions, how things work, so that when it comes time to collect their data, they're not fidgeting around and maybe delete something mistakenly. So you get all of that out the way. You give them no more than, and actually 5 minutes might be too long. But you take that time to give them that opportunity to kind of have fun with the populations. And so they click on the Add Mate, and they essentially just go through the simulation on their own. And you'll see as the generations unfold, you can speed up the generations. You can pause it, fast forward it if you need to. And when you're ready for your students to actually start the lesson, you just have everyone reset and we start over. Next, we'll go to the predict section, the explore section. So when it's time to explore, this is where your students will make their predictions. So you gave them 5 minutes, you gave them some time to play, to kind of get that off their chest, and they are now free to actually learn and receive from it. And so the focus of this section of the 5E model is to explain the variations within a population or species by comparing some external features like behavior, physiology of the organism, and how their survival and how these things enhance their survival of the simulation. And so that is the focus of this next section. And then there's some skills that are also available. And these are just general life skills. They're able to communicate and validate their conclusions, supported by their observations. They can use models and be able to represent those things in the natural world. So the first thing they do is they would make a prediction about how the rabbit population would change or won't change over 4 generations. So you could give your students a worksheet that relates to this. And then we have some questioning strategies that go with that as well. I'm not going to go through these questioning strategies, but it gives you an idea of, it helps you help your students, shall I say. So it allows you as the teacher to help guide your students in the direction that they need to go. So for example, what are some differences between the 2 different environments? What can we change about the different bunnies? What happens when you select the limiting factor? And all of these are just questions based on them playing, based on them exploring the simulation itself. How can you use this to solve the different challenges? And then you have some questions to assess their understanding. So how do animals adapt in these different seasons? And then they're able to answer these things as well. Again, for you as a checkpoint, they're able to complete their investigations. And I have a worksheet here. I'll go back in a moment. But here's a copy of a worksheet that you could give them as well that correlates to these questions that we have. So we have a couple challenging questions, and you can give them copies of this worksheet, and we can provide this for you afterward as well. So let's go back. So that was the first challenge. Then the second challenge, and this is where we have our gradual release. I kind of keep a couple notes up here at top just to help me understand what's happening at this point. But if you notice in the first section of Explore, let me go back. In the first section of Explore, your first question was make predictions. So it's essentially a right or wrong answer. They look at the actual data, they make their observations. So there isn't a lot of predicting that needs to go on. But then when you come here to this second section, you want them to make some predictions about how the rabbit population will change over those 4. Okay. How the rabbit population will change over those 4 generations. If they added wolves, so if they added a predator, if they introduced a predator to the mix of things. Next, after the brown fur is introduced as a trait. Oh, I missed it. I apologize. So make predictions about the rabbit population change over 4 generations if a mutation introducing brown fur, which is a dominant trait, is introduced to the population's gene pool. And then you have them record this information in that table that I just provided. So they would click on the brown fur, make it dominant, then they would add a mate. watch what happens after 4 generations, record their observations, and then write down the number of rabbits with white and the number of rabbits with brown fur. And so this is what it would look like. So you have them add brown fur, and then they would add a mate. I need to clear this. And then you'll see here, this is each generation. And so you have them wait until after each generation. They can click on the data probe and it gives them that actual information at each level, how many brown, how many white after each generation. And then they would make their, they would record their data here on the table. So how many more white bunnies, what would happen if you made 20 brown bunnies, and then what did you change, and how many generations did it take for that change to take effect? All right, there's a question. I'm gonna stop right here for a second. There's a question that says, which age group or grade do you think a simulation like this with a different prediction would be suitable for? I've actually seen these PhET simulations done as young as 1st and 2nd grade. I mean, our students nowadays are so tech savvy that they're able to manipulate a lot. And I think, you know, just having them, because they're online, you know, right now because of the pandemic, having something that's a little bit more engaging for them helps keep them interested. It helps keep them engaged while learning while learning the content that they need to learn as well.
Sorry, Tiffany, can I add something here? On E-alpha, we categorize the simulations per grades. So once you go to E-alpha, you will have them like cycles. It will tell you this is for primary, this is for middle school, this is for high school, and this is for university. So we made them all categorized by level or by grade. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. All right, so like I said, this is the gradual release. And so you've given your students a little bit more autonomy over how they learn, which helps them further understand their own comprehension. And so you have those guiding questions, which serve as like metacognitive prompts that allows your students to think about what they're learning. But then when you gradually release them on their own, to be able to understand and make predictions and then record their observations and communicate their results. That's when the real ownership of their learning actually takes place. All right, where's my cursor? Can you all still see my PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, we can see that. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so then what we have here so then what we have here is another section of a worksheet that you can provide for your students. There was, oh my goodness. All right. So they've, the next prediction or the next challenge is to make predictions about the rabbit's population that changes over 4 generations if a wolf was introduced. So after they've added the brown fur, you introduce a wolf. And then when you reach the 2nd generation, observe what happens. And so these are just questions that you would have your students answer on a worksheet or on a document that you've provided for them. Again, you use the data probe to record the number of white and brown rabbits in each generation. And so here, when you add a mate, we all know you need a mate in order to reproduce. And they added brown fur. they've added a wolf, and you click on the data probe. And then what happens after a while? So all the bunnies have died because the brown bunnies hadn't had an opportunity to enter just during this example here. Next, we have our explore section, and our explain section, where the content focus is to be able to identify changes in the genetic traits that occurred over several generations. And then you can give examples of the Galapagos finches. You can give examples of the peppered moth, just several different examples that you can give. And we'll talk about the peppered moth in a moment when we do elaborate and evaluate. So some of the skills that they'll be able to use, be able to analyze their observations. So taking the data and explaining exactly what it means in order to formulate some explanations, be able to communicate and validate their own conclusions with support, and then be able to predict trends. And so these are just some of the skills that your students will gain from doing this activity. Here is where we suggest that you introduce any new vocabulary words. So maybe you have another worksheet, or you have a document, or even just verbally or in the chat, you introduce some words that may be difficult for them. And a lot of this deals with some planning in order to identify what are some new vocabulary words that your students have learned or should have learned at this point. So maybe at first they didn't understand what a trait was. And so now they're able to better communicate what a trait is, because they were able to see the trait actually take place during the simulation. As well as an adaptation, a mutation, the word mutual selection, and then be able to relate and then be able to relate it to the simulation. Here, they can also discuss some advantages and disadvantages of using a simulation. So these are just some life skills that this simulation allows students So these are just some simulations that allow students to enter into the workforce. So these are some skills that they will be able to take along with them at a further, just not within your class, outside within the real world. They're able to reason, they're able to deduce conclusions. Again, you provide those guiding questions as well as some comprehension based on the hypothesis. And so going back to our hypothesis, we stated that if we wanted a population to continue, there were four predictions, or four things that needed to take place in order for them to be successful. And then we have some checkpoints. So what do you think is a checkpoint or a question that you as a teacher could use to assess whether or not your students acquired the knowledge that they were supposed to gain at this point? If you can put that in the chat for me. So what are some things that you want to be able to make sure that your students understood or gained at this point? Does anyone have any? So let me go back to the hypothesis really quickly. It says that students, in order for a population to be able to reproduce, there are environmental factors that are required. The trait must benefit the survival of the students, and the trait must be able to be passed down. What are some things that you as a teacher want to be able to assess or affirm that your students gained during this section? And it doesn't have to be specific to the content, but at this point of explanation, what do you feel as though your students need to be able to do? How can you use this information practically? Okay, very nice. So what factors affect natural selection? Okay, think about where we are in the E5 model. We're at the explain level. So what do you want your students to be able to do? So they've already gone through the simulation. They've answered the vocabulary questions, or vocabulary words. They've related it to the simulation. They've manipulated the simulation in order to challenge, to answer those challenging questions. You want them to be able to understand how mutations can affect a population. Very nice. Just to see the interactions are free online. Oh, okay. Is the hypothesis verified? And then they need to be able to justify it. Very nice. The advantages and disadvantages of a mutation. Populations are supposed to pass their best genes before they die. So you can ask a question, did that actually take place? So did the strong survive? What factors affect natural selection? Very nice. How mutations affect our life? Very good. So these are some great questions. So you as a teacher can assess whether or not your students are ready to move on to be able to elaborate. So can they explain what they just did using the data that they acquired? So that's what's meant at this section. They should be able to understand the relation between adaptation and population. Exactly. Be able to apply it to genetic engineering. Oh, that's pretty advanced, actually. Nice. How does mutation affect the different living organisms in a population? That's a good one. All right, so now we'll move on to elaborate. So the content focus is to identify some changes in the genetic traits that have occurred over several generations through natural selection, such as the Galapagos finches or the peppered moth. So we want to be able to have our students take the knowledge that they just gained from this simulation and be able to apply it to something else. So that's what we mean by elaborate. So we can, it says the first step is to develop a series of questions as to the cause of the decline in the peppered moth population. And then you will use your guiding questions, your comprehension questions, and relate everything back to the original hypothesis. And then you as a teacher, you have your checkpoints. So I'm not going to go through that aspect of it because we have about 10 minutes. So you would go through your guiding questions, again, the metacognitive prompts in order to help support your students. And this is also where you will address any misconceptions. And so, and this is where a lot of the misconceptions may come into place. So you may have students who have done the simulation, they completely understand what happened. They can justify it based on their own data. When I added brown fur and I added the wolves into the Arctic environment, all of the white bunnies stayed while the brown bunnies started to disappear, things like that. But then when you ask them to relate it to the peppered moth is when things might get a little unclear for them. And so this is to help them understand or be able to apply their knowledge. And so here we have just the modeling of simulation of natural selection. And so for those of you who may not be aware of the story of the process of natural selection with the peppered moths and the black moths, in the 1800s in the UK during the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of soot in the air from pollution, and it caused the trunks of the trees to begin to get black. And so there were both white pepper moths and black moths that would rest on these tree trunks. And then eventually, this is what began to happen. And so before the Industrial Revolution, you had the white pepper moths and the black moths that rested on the tree trunks. And you notice that the population over time for the black pepper moths began to increase, whereas the white pepper moths population began to decrease. because after the Industrial Revolution, so after the onset of the factories and things like that in the UK, it actually changed the environment. So you can discuss and have discussions about how the Industrial Revolution affects natural selection. You can link it to the environmental balance. Yes, very nice. And so then the last section we have is evaluation. And so this can be done at any time in the learning process. If you noticed, as we were going through each stage of the 5E model, we would ask some guiding questions. We would do some checks for understanding to make sure that your students understood as they went along. But the evaluation section specifically aims to obtain evidence for understanding in relation to the learning outcomes of the lesson. And so if you relate your evaluation back to the learning questions or the learning outcome. I saw that someone had their hand raised. Is there something you'd like to say? No? Okay. And then we have the two different types of evaluation. Formative assessments, which are informal observation notes, short questions like the metacognitive prompts or the questioning strategy questions. And then you have your summative, so such as tests and assignments that you assign. And then we have some checkpoint questions. This is for you as the teacher. So are your students progressing? So we've gone through 4 of the 5 steps of the 5E model. We've related it to our simulation. We've engaged our students, if we start again from the top. So we've engaged our students prior to even getting on the simulation, knowing anything about the simulation. We've given the students some time to explore the simulation in order to kind of, you let them explore on their own just to kind of get that excitement, to kind of bring their level of excitement down, and they'll be able to focus on the lesson at hand. They're able to explain what it is that they've learned. So they're able to take that information that they gained from the simulation and they can relate it and elaborate on it. So this is where being able to take that information and what I used to call it, or what I still do, what I call it is owning it. And so they can take that information and they can apply it to different situations and circumstances. So that's the peppered moth and the Galapagos finches with their beaks. Being able to apply that same understanding of how natural selection works to different areas and then evaluate it. Again, you have students who are at many different levels. And so you knowing your level of students would help you also determine what sort of evaluation parameters you want to set for your students, how you want to, what type of evaluation you want to do, how much scaffolding you want to do in order to support them. The next checkpoint question we have is what scientific thinking needs improvement. So where at on this 5E model might you need to revisit in order to help bring them up to the level that you think they should be at that time? What new conceptual understandings have they developed? So how have they progressed in their own understanding? And this could also be done as a reflection for them so that they can, a simple KWL chart would help them understand what is it that they learned and how can they communicate that information? And then what concepts or misunderstandings do you need to revisit? And so maybe there's a couple students who just didn't get something, and you can either revisit it, if time permits, or you can revisit it, at a later date. Maybe you want to make this the starter for the next day in order to assess whether or not your students actually was able to comprehend the information. Okay, so we have a couple comments here. We're able to make students explain the different points in the lesson by themselves. For those who would like to, those certificates, okay. Also, with me, if you don't know, I am American. but I live here in the Middle East and my Arabic needs a little bit of work. And so there's times where it's not necessarily the information that they received. It's just that their level of comprehension in the English language may be limiting. And so a couple things that you can also do is allow them to have peer talk, speak in your mother tongue, be able to understand in the language that is most suitable for your comprehension. But then, if it's an English class or an English language class, have them relay it back to you in English. And so that's one of the things that I do often, where I'll give students, 2 minutes of talk time in your mother tongue. And to be quite honest, they could be talking about anything. But then I will call on people sporadically or periodically and just ask them to explain what they learn in English. And so if you can comprehend it in any language, and even if your English language skills are limiting, as a teacher, one, you should know what their level of English language should be, but be able to assess their comprehension at that same time. I remember when I was in the classroom, I used to do something called phone a friend. And so what we would do with phone a friend is if I asked a student something and she or he didn't know the answer, I would give them an opportunity to phone a friend. And so they would just call someone else in the classroom, not physically call them, but, call on someone to help them with the answer. But whoever they called on, that person was responsible for making sure that they understood. So if student A didn't understand the information and she called on student B gave the answer, but student B is also responsible to make sure that student A understood. And I would give an opportunity for those two students to chat, to comprehend it in whatever language they need in order to fully comprehend it. And before that class period ended, I went back to student A to affirm the comprehension. And so what would happen a little bit later, as we went along, a lot of times students would say, I don't want to be student B. Don't ask me for the answer because I don't want to have to teach you. I barely understand it myself. And we know that teachers are learners twice. And so it serves two purposes. Student A gets the information in a peer manner so that students can receive it from their peers, but it also confirms for student B that they truly understand the information and they own it. And so, student B may be reluctant at times or excited, depending on the student, in order to give the answer. But it helps you as a teacher to confirm that student B actually has it. So they understand it because they understand it well enough to teach it. All right, so what we have here is we are at the end of our presentation. We have about 10 minutes left, and we are going to have an introduction. But before we finish, I just want to kind of go over the objectives and see if we've actually met our objectives for today. We were supposed to go over distance learning and how to make learning fun online using the different simulations. We should be able to understand how to differentiate in order to help reach all students at their levels, and then be able to use some different questioning strategies to support student comprehension and to assess your own comprehension as well. And so, Ms. Danielle, I will turn it over to you now. If you have any questions, I apologize. If you have any questions, please feel free to either write them in the chat or unmute yourself, and we'll take maybe 2 minutes before Ms. Danielle begins her session to answer any questions you all might have about this segment of the lesson, of the presentation. I apologize. All right, Ms. Danielle, let's turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for this informative and fun distance learning presentation. My name is Danielle Nasser. Just let me share my video for 2 minutes, then I'll be ready for the very short presentation. My name is Danielle Nasser. I am the head of consultancy and training with Alpha Publishing. But before joining Alpha Publishing, I was a teacher like you. I was teaching science, biology, and chemistry. I'll be with you. It's time to switch off the camera. I'll be with you for 10 minutes only, just to give you an orientation about Alpha Science grades 6 to 8. And I will refer back to what Tiffany showed us while I am moving through my presentation. Our science is for grades 6, 7, and 8. We have 2 volumes per each grade, supported by a practice book. The program is built as an integrated program. It means in each grade from 6 to 8, we integrated the science and technology, life science, earth science, and physical science. In front of you, you can see the progression for these 3 grades together. The 3 grades were built in a careful way, in a sequential, spiral, coherent way. You will find that we have the chapters that represent the 4 disciplines, life science, earth science, physical science, and science and technology, and how they are connected to each other, and then how each grade moves to another grade in a spiral way. The other graphic organizer, it will show you the connection between the topics across the 6 grades, how each grade will deliver to the next grade to make the program coherent. As a former teacher, and I'm sure it's the same for you, what are the criteria that it makes a good science program? We all, as science specialists, science teachers, educators, we search for a strong component, for wealth of resources. We care a lot for teaching smarter and not harder through planning and the other supportive materials. How the program is aligned to the next generation science standard charts. Where to find the 5 E's per lesson, which is the instructional model that we talked about. The 5 E's, it stands for engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. Wealth of experiments or hands-on inquiries. STEAM projects. STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Differentiation. What assessment the program has. Is the program connected to other subjects through cross-curricular connections? And the digital path. I'm starting with the digital path to mention that our program is fully interactive. It means that the student book, the workbook or the practice book, and all the other resources or ancillaries are web pages. Students can answer directly to the page. It's not a PDF file. It is used online, but if the school does not have strong internet to support 500 students logging in at the same time, they can download the program from the app and use it offline. The digital path, it comes as free of charge with the option. I took a screenshot. This is our science, and you can see we have the teachers' resources, we have the ancillaries, we have student book, practice book, assessment, alpha video clips, and alpha simulations that Tiffany was talking about. Those simulations are classified per level, and it tells you each simulation, it targets which level. And what Tiffany showed us today, she showed us a simulation for the middle school about the natural selection that we have it in grade 8. What about planning? For planning, we have a full, beautiful scope and sequence to show you the chapter. What is the skill we are targeting in this chapter? The lessons, the objectives per lesson, the essential questions. What are the new vocabs? Here it shows you every lesson has 3 experiments or inquiries or hands-on or practices. We call them directed, guided and full independent practice. Also, it tells what are the careers or people in science, scientists or people that they had a discovery or invention. And it tells you at the end of each chapter we have a full STEAM project where students will apply on all what they learn, and they will integrate science with technology, engineering, art, and math to build a project and to be problem solvers and engineers. We also have full alignment per page to the next generation science standard. It shows us each lesson what are the performance expectations, disciplinary core idea, cross-cutting concept, and science and engineering practices. Also, we have a full plans for every single chapter. What's the big idea? What did you know, or the prerequisite question? We have what are the lessons, the essential question, the vocabs, the hands-on experiments or hands-on activities, and the assessment. Also, it's a summary about what is the reading skill, career in science, chapter review, chapter guide, and the STEAM activity. In addition, that all these resources are in your teacher's edition as a PDF file on eAlpha, and this is a screenshot from grade 7. It shows you the ancillaries, and it will show you I have something called Teacher's Resource Lesson Plans. In addition, I have my alignment charts to the next generation science standard and the scope and sequence. All these links, it converts the PDF files to a Word document. If I go to the lesson plan, I will have a window opened like this. This is grade 7. It is asking me to download. Once I download the whole program as a chapter plan and a lesson plan, it is converted to a Word document where it gives me that this chapter, it needs 16 days and a half. Alpha day is 45 minutes per day. And it gives me every single part about the program, the chapter opener, the big idea. Then what is my skill, my objectives, essential questions, vocabulary, materials, the next generation science standard, and then it gives me the 5 E's and what I'll be doing in each part. And it gives me extra resources, how I extend and differentiate, and then how to close and assess. Those all are converted to a Word document format, in addition to the scope and sequence and the alignment charts, to give you the opportunity to edit and to customize those plans up to your needs. Every chapter starts with a big idea and ends up as a wrap-up with the big idea, with an activity where the students will be summarizing the big idea and the chapter. Also, every chapter has its reading skill. We start with the reading skill, and throughout the chapter, we are connecting to the reading skill. You will see that we keep on. We start with the big idea, wrap up with the big idea, visit the big idea in the middle, start with the reading skill, wrap up with the reading skill, visiting the reading skill in the middle of the chapter. This will give coherency for the program, and the students will visit these skills and big idea while they are moving throughout the chapter. Our lesson plan is fully built on the 5 E's. 5 E's are clearly listed in the teacher's edition. It will tell you when you will engage, when you are exploring, when you are explaining, when you are elaborating, and then when you are evaluating. Also, each lesson, it will start with a lesson objective, essential questions, a diagnostic assessment per lesson to assess the prior knowledge. How do you warm up and prepare the students for the lesson when you engage, and then what are the new vocabs that you will be dealing with. each lesson has 3 experiments or hands-on, directed, guided, and full independent experiment. In addition to that, every lesson has a school home activity where we are giving the students a simple, safe experiment to show it to their parents. Every chapter ends with a STEAM project that it follows the engineering design. Students will start to identify a problem, then do a research, develop multiple possible solutions, build a prototype, test their prototype, communicate the model, evaluate and redesign, then record and share. Also, all the NGSS, they have their own alignment to the next generation science standard. I'm coming to differentiation, and I know differentiation is a very tricky topic. We need to differentiate, but some teachers, they don't feel comfortable in differentiation because it needs a lot of classroom discipline, it needs preparation, it needs knowing the level of the students. This is why in Alpha we made it very simple and explicit for you. In Alpha Science, we have 3 types of differentiations. The first differentiation is on the student academic level through misconceptions, instructional support, through extra activities called the anchor activities. Those anchor activities is a booklet, a digital booklet found on eAlpha, where when you click the link, it will give you 3 practice sheets. The 3 of them, they follow the same objective, but the level, it is for 3 levels. The below level, that it's color coded with purple and it has a dot on your left hand side. The on level and the color coding is blue and the dot is in the middle. The above level, the color coding is green and the dot is on the right hand side. Students will not know what are these icons they stand for, but the teacher would know, and she will be giving the students those practice sheets through the anchor activity, where the teacher will be engaging and will be differentiating at the beginning of the lesson. As you can see, those are on eAlpha. You can see this circle. Teachers can either print out, click the printer, 25 copies and print and give to the students as paper and pencil, or she can assign and send it to the student's account on eAlpha, which it comes free of charge with the adoption. All these pages are fully interactive. Students can write, and of course, some of those web pages are automatically scored if it is circle or fill in the blanks or match, or if it is an essay, the teachers, they need to score them, and upon the scoring, a full report will be generated. So either they can print out or they can assign, and students will do them through eAlpha account and send them to the teacher, where she will be getting a full report on the students' performance. The second type of differentiation, and also Tiffany talked about this, it is the 8 different learning styles, or we call them 8 different multiple intelligences. Where we find this in Alpha program, when the students are doing their anchor activity or another activity that is called exit, we will find those are for teachers, instructions for teachers. It tells me in this activity, I'm targeting the verbal, logical, visual, and naturalist. In this one, I'm targeting the verbal and the logical. And this will bring us to the second differentiation, which is to differentiate based on the 8 learning styles or 8 different multiple intelligence. We have a third differentiation. This is based on the English language learners. This differentiation is for the students that they struggle in English. And we all know that science teachers, they have a very difficult task. They are not only teaching science, they are teaching science and teaching English at the same time, because science is like an essay where students, they have to be good in reading English and writing English in order to understand science. So I mentioned 3 differentiation: academic level, learning styles, and ELL or English language learners. Now I will reach to the teacher's favorite part, which is the assessment. We have different types of assessment. We have the diagnostic assessment, when you assess the prior knowledge. We have formative assessment with the lesson review in the student book. We have formative or summative assessment in the chapter review, and we have a summative assessment in the unit review. In addition to that, don't forget the practice book, where the practice book is a formative assessment. Again, the students will have it as a book, because what we have for the students will be having the student books and the practice books and hardcover, and all the other resources in addition to the student book and the practice book will be digital in web pages. So either they will reflect into the pages in their practice book, or the teacher can send and assign these pages, or she can print out and give to the students. Another type of assessment is my exit activity per lesson. It's a practice sheet. Also, it's a digital booklet on eAlpha, where teachers will go and they either print or they assign, and of course all the other web pages, they have the option to view. If you don't have time to give this as a homework or to print out, you can display it on a regular board using a simple projector, and you can answer and write directly into the page or do it as a class activity. In addition to all the assessment I mentioned, the diagnostic, the formative, the summative, we also have 2 softwares on eAlpha, and of course this is also free of charge. One is called the Exam View, and the other one is called Learnosity. The Exam View is external questions. The Learnosity are questions related and built on Alpha 6 to 8 content. You can go to the software and create your own exams by one click. You create your exams based on objectives, based on standards, based on criteria. You have a wizard to tell you what kind of questions we have and what you can pick and choose. Learnosity is a software that the content is fully built on Alpha books. If you still need more external exams, you can go to the exam generator and build extra questions that are external questions. Of course, all the assessment in Alpha Science, Learnosity, Exam View, they are, of course, based on the next generation science standards. The assessment that we have, most of them, they have rubrics to help the teachers to score these assessments, some of them including some of the hands-on activities or the experiments. Also, at the end of each chapter in the student book and the teacher's edition, there is a chapter guide. I love this. It is like a full summary about every single lesson in the chapter, and in the teacher's edition, it will guide the teacher how she needs to divide her class into 4 groups or 5 groups, depending how many lessons we have. Each group will be summarizing the lesson, and then the whole class will build a chart where in this chart they will summarize every single lesson, and by the end they will be summarizing the whole chapter based on the questions we have here. Also, in Alpha Science, we are connecting science to different fields in education. You can see this box. We are connecting science to math, science to engineering, science to art, science to science to math, technology, careers, in math, technology, and science, science in action. I love this. It's history of math, technology, and science, talking about scientists, and some of them are from the Middle East region, some of them are from the other parts of the world, because our science and all Alpha programs are global, where we are connecting the subjects we are publishing to different parts of the world, and by this we are introducing the students to different cultures and to the global connections. Also, we have some calculator activities for some lessons that it needs calculators. By the end, I just had a quick walk through the Science 6 to 8. And as a summary, I walked you through the components, resources, planning, and teaching support, materials, and GSS alignments, the 5 E's. What we have 3 hands-on, directed, guided, independent, plus a home activity, a STEAM project by the end of each chapter that stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math, differentiation based on academic level, 8 different learning styles and ELL support, and the cross-curricular connection where we are connecting science to different topics and different subjects, in addition to the digital pad that it comes fully free of charge with the adoptions for the administration, for the teachers, and for the students. And don't forget that you can use it offline if you don't have the strong internet and you don't want to go through the hassle of the slow internet. For more information, and if you need to know more, you can go on eAlpha on our website, and you can download the product brochure. It is like a summary for what I did with more information. This is the cover of the brochure, and this is the link. Of course, we will be sharing the recorded session that has the PowerPoint, so you can get the link. If you need to have samples or a trial access, please just visit www.alphapublishing.com, and you go to ask me at alphapublishing.com, and the box, it looks like this framed box with red. You click it, and then you will put in the box if you need samples, if you need a free trial access, and we will return back to you as soon as we can.